Hi, so today we're going to talk about the different reactions in photosynthesis. I'm going to go kind of quickly through this section because you don't need to know the specifics of every reaction. You basically need to know, okay, what are the reactants of the reaction, say the light-dependent reactions, and what are the products, what's produced from those reactions. Those are the main things you need to get out of this section. So some of it I'm going to go quite quickly through. So let's take a look at a chloroplast because this is the site of photosynthesis. So in plants, it takes place inside the chloroplast. If you blow up a leaf, you look inside the leaf plant cells, you'll find these green structures called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts contain thylakoids, which are sac-like photosynthetic membranes. So this is kind of where photosynthesis takes place, specifically the light reaction. So here's a single thylakoid. And thylakoids are arranged in stacks known as grana. A singular stack is called a granum. So here's a granum. There's lots of them. They're basically they look like Mentos, green Mentos stacked together. So proteins in the thylakoid membrane organize chlorophyll and other pigments into clusters called photosystems, which are the light collecting units of the chloroplasts. So inside these thylakoids or granum, we see the pigments like chlorophyll, that's going to capture all of the energy from sunlight, and they're clustered into photosystems. So the reactions of photosystems include the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle. The light-dependent reactions take place within the thylakoid membranes themselves. And the Calvin cycle takes place in the stroma, which is the region outside the thylakoid membranes. I like to think of it as the cytoplasm of the chloroplast, so it's outside the membranes. So if we look at the overview, this is the picture that I want you really to memorize. This is the most important thing. This is the overview of both the light-dependent and the light-independent reactions. So in the light-dependent reactions, we have light and water, along with NADP plus and ADP, coming into the light-dependent reactions, which take place in the thylakoids. And the products are ATP, NADPH, and oxygen, which is released. So in comes light and water, and we're producing ATP, NADPH, which is electron carrier, and oxygen. These products of the light-dependent reactions go into the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. So ATP, NADPH, and CO2 go into the Calvin cycle, and what's produced are what we are looking for, the food that is made from photosynthesis, sugar. So we need electron carriers because these electron carriers are going to capture this light energy. So when electrons in chlorophyll absorb the sunlight, the electrons gain a great deal of energy. Cells use electron carriers to transport these high-energy electrons from chlorophyll to other molecules. So one carrier molecule is called NADP+. Okay, it's going to carry one electron. Electron carriers such as NADP+ transport electrons. It accepts and holds two high-energy electrons along with a hydrogen ion. This converts the NADP+ into NADPH. So when you see NADPH, that means it is holding two high-energy electrons with hydrogen. If you see the NADP+, it means it is not carrying electrons. So the conversion of NADP+ to NADPH is one way some of the energy of sunlight can be trapped in chemical form. The NADPH carries high-energy electrons to chemical reactions elsewhere in the cell. These high-energy electrons are used to help build a variety of molecules the cell needs, including carbohydrates like glucose. So in order to capture the energy from the sunlight, we capture that energy, it excites the electrons, makes them high-energy electrons, and NADP+, going too far, NADP+ picks up those high-energy electrons and carries them to other reactions. So the first reaction in photosynthesis is light dependent because it depends on the light. It requires light, and it produces oxygen gas and converts ADP to NADP plus into the energy carriers ATP and NADPH. So photosynthesis begins when pigments in photosystem 2 absorb light, increasing their energy level. So we talked about photosystems. These contain the chlorophyll, okay, which is going to trap the energy from sunlight and produce these high energy electrons. So photosystem 2, light goes in, okay, increasing the energy level of the electrons. These high energy electrons are then passed on to the electron transport chain. Here's the electron transport chain. Transports electrons. These are just electron carriers, basically protons. Proteins that carry electrons. Okay? Here's your high energy electron. Enzymes on the thylakoid membrane break water molecules into hydrogen ions and oxygen atoms and energized electrons. So here's where water comes in. It gets split to make even more high energy electrons. These energized electrons from water replace the high energy electrons that chlorophyll lost to the electron transport chain. As the plants remove electrons from water, oxygen is left behind and released into the air. So we're adding water and oxygen is being released. The hydrogen ions left behind when water is broken apart are released inside the thylakoid membrane. So here we go. Energy from the electrons is used to transport hydrogen ions from the stroma into the inner thylakoid space. So down goes the electrons, down the electron transport chain, and in pumps all this hydrogen. And this is important. It's going to build this energy gradient. So high energy electrons move through the electron transport chain from photosystem 2 to photosystem 1. Here's photosystem 1. Pigments in photosystem 1 use energy from light to re-energize the electrons. Because the electrons gained energy from the light in photosystem 2, but lost it because they gave their energy to these transport proteins that were transporting this hydrogen inside the thylakoid. But now we re-energize them because photosystem 1 has chlorophyll. It traps the energy from the sunlight and re-energizes the electrons. NADP plus then picks up these high energy electrons along with hydrogen ions and becomes NADPH. So here we go. Now made NADPH. So if we look at this whole thing, we added sunlight, we added water, we released oxygen, and the goal was to make this NADPH, this high energy electron carrier. As electrons are passed from chlorophyll to NADP+, more hydrogen ions are pumped across the membrane. Soon, the inside of the membrane fills up with positively charged hydrogen ions, which makes the outside of the membrane negatively charged. So inside is positive, outside is negative. We're creating an electrical charge here. And with this electrical charge, we're going to make the most important molecule, which is ATP. So we keep pumping in these hydrogen ions. The difference in charges across the membrane provides the energy to make ATP. Hydrogen ions cannot cross the membrane directly. They have to go through a protein channel called ATP synthase. And it allows the hydrogen ions to pass back through the membrane because remember, we want the charge to be equal on both sides. Diffusion says, hey, the amount of hydrogen in here has to be the amount outside as well. So hydrogen goes through ATP synthase, and as it passes through, the protein rotates. As it rotates, ATP synthase binds ADP and a phosphate group together to produce ATP. So through this whole process, okay, the goal was to make an electron carrier, an NADPH, and molecules of ATP. ATP are our energy molecules that we're going to use to make sugar or food for the plant. So we used light and water along with high energy electrons to make NADPH and ATP. Because of this system, light-dependent electron transport produces not only high energy electrons, but ATP as well. The light-dependent reactions use water, ADP, and NADP+, and they produce oxygen ATP and NADPH. This is the most important part. If you don't remember anything else about the electron transport chain, you must remember these two things: what they use and what they produce. These compounds provide the energy to build energy-containing sugars from low-energy compounds. So the second reaction is the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent. It doesn't require light. So the ATP and NADPH formed by the light-dependent reactions contain abundance of chemical energy, but they're not stable enough to store that energy for more than a few minutes. So during the Calvin cycle, plants use that energy in ATP and NADPH to build high-energy compounds that can be stored for a long time, such as carbohydrates. So the Calvin cycle uses ATP and NADPH from the light-dependent reactions to produce sugars. This is the most important thing to remember about the Calvin cycle. Because the Calvin cycle does not require light, these reactions are also called light-independent reactions. So here is the Calvin cycle. Basically, we use carbon dioxide, 6 carbon dioxide molecules, enter the cycle from the atmosphere and combine with 5 carbon molecules that are in the plant. Okay? The result is 12 3-carbon molecules, which are then converted into higher energy forms. The energy from this conversion comes from the ATP and NADPH from the light-dependent reactions. So I add ATP and NADPH. 2 of the 12 3-carbon molecules are removed from the cycle. And the molecules are used to produce sugars, lipids, amino acids, and other compounds. So these molecules produced by the Calvin cycle are used to build the sugars and other compounds in plants. The 10 remaining 3-carbon molecules are converted back into 6 5-carbon molecules, which are used to begin the next cycle. So we use the carbon molecules that are in plants normally, plus ATP and NADPH and carbon dioxide to build the sugars needed. The two sets of photosynthetic reactions work together. The light-dependent reactions trap sunlight energy in a chemical form, and the light-independent reactions use that chemical energy to produce stable, high-energy sugars from carbon dioxide and water. So there are a couple factors that affect photosynthesis. Specifically, the rate of photosynthesis is the amount of water, the temperature, and the intensity of light. So those 3 things affect how photosynthesis works. It also affects the life of your plant. If you're not watering your plant, or you're not it's not getting enough sunlight, it can't make the sugars and other compounds needed for survival. So what's going to happen? The plant dies. That is all for today. Thanks for watching.